Welcome to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. I'm your host, Hannah O'Brien, both a veteran spouse and the program manager for the Veteran Spouse Network. On each episode of our show, I will host different guests to learn more about the stories, unmet needs, and resources available to our military and veteran families. We're the show that's making space for your stories, so that here you know you're never alone.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this month's episode of the Veteran Spouse Network podcast. I'm super excited to welcome back my husband, Cody. Some of you may remember him. He joined us for our February episode, and we talked about his experience with moral injury and how it's impacted our relationship. And this month, in honor of PTSD Awareness Month, we're going to be talking about PTSD. We've also talked about PTSD before on our January episode. And on that episode, you heard me interview a veteran spouse, Lauren, who shared kind of her experience with her husband's PTSD. But we got a lot of great reactions from having Cody come and share his perspective as a veteran, and then also hearing from us as a couple. So we thought it would be great to hear from us on another topic that we know, most of you in this community are dealing with the PTSD in some way or another. I know for sure most of the people who come and seek out our peer support services are looking for support around how to support themselves, as well as how to support themselves when they're supporting a loved one who has PTSD. So, but I'm very grateful and proud that my husband was willing to come back and share more of his story and his experience. So you guys may already know a little bit about Cody if you've listened to the previous episode, but you may be new listeners. So Cody, I'd love for you to kind of just do kind of a quick intro about your military history and kind of, what you're up to now before we dive in.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the podcast again. Like I said before, if there's anything, any of my experiences that can help anybody else, I'm all about it. For those of you that don't know, my name is Cody. I served in the Marine Corps from 2003 to 2010. So 2141 doesn't matter to you guys. Essentially, what I did do was I enlisted as a amphibious assault vehicle technician, essentially. Didn't change that the fact that you still go through the same boot camp, same other combat training schools and whatnot. So essentially, on my first deployment, even though I was a mechanized unit, we were on foot doing patrols, what we call pounding sand. Just like everybody else, just given the circumstances at the time, that's what was required of us. So I got injured on my second deployment, essentially, ultimately led to my medical separation in 2010. I wanted to do a full 20 years and retire at an early age, and then go on to, probably some other secondary retirement. But that wasn't in the cards, unfortunately. So fast forward several years after I got out of the Marine Corps, I did a couple of other things. I went to school, did another couple of other jobs. Ended up what I do now. I am an EMT, also currently in paramedic school, and that I have found has been more rewarding than anything else I've done since I've gotten out of the Marines.
Cool.
So essentially where that comes into play with those similarities is what I found that is a rarity in other areas is the camaraderie, I guess if you want to call it the type of brotherhood that's involved, how we look out for each other, we have those close-knit relationships, kind of, go through a lot together and, always have each other's backs.
Amazing. And such a good fit for him. So we're all happy. And it's interesting as we're talking about this topic of PTSD this month that, well, obviously PTSD is not unique to the military or veteran community in the fact that anyone can get PTSD. But obviously we see a lot of our service members and veterans developing it because of their exposure to traumatic experiences. And it can also be prevalent in the EMT paramedic field for the same reason, right? More experiences to trauma. So it's plagues, I hate to say it, but we'll say it, many different career paths, and we still deal with it. And I'm sure you see others who are managing it and are managing the symptoms of it, perhaps, in your current field.
Yes, very much.
But let's back up. So if it wasn't obvious from us talking, Cody does have a PTSD diagnosis. It's something, you know, he manages, of course, and then we manage as a couple. And so that's what we're really gonna talk about here today. And we'll talk a lot about that, but to kind of get us started, I'm really curious to hear how was PTSD being talked about? And if it was, how was it being talked about while you were serving on active duty?
While I was in that time frame, definitely the early 2000s, no, it was not talked about. It was a very stigmatized four-letter, acronym. And no, you didn't talk about it. It was one of those things where if it ever did get mentioned, it was like this dark shadow kind of in the corner. That didn't really exist. It wasn't anything that was, tangible for sure, but because we didn't talk about it, it had this negative connotation to it. And so yeah, it was just thought of, in a very negative way. We would actually have, sometimes our unit leaders would flat out tell you didn't have it. Actually, I remember taking these little paper surveys that we would get after, on our way home from theater, essentially, that would be given from the corpsman to our platoon sergeant. Platoon sergeant would hand it to you. He would say, "Hey, here, fill this out really quick and hand it back." And I think it was maybe like 10 questions. I didn't ever really read. I didn't read it. But he just said, "Hey, yeah, here, answer no to everything and, give it back." And I actually remember at one point I was looking at a couple of my Marine buddies. I'm like, "Hey, did you actually read this first question?" I'm reading the first question. I don't exactly remember what it was, but then I remember my platoon sergeant, as I'm reading it, snatched the paper out of my hand. He says, he said something like, "Don't worry about it." He circled all the answers for me. He said, "There, it's done."
Wow.
And yeah, so, but I do know it had to do with, like if you're having any kind of, PTSD symptoms.
Yeah, a PTSD screener of sorts.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I even remember another instance. Our first sergeant was talking to, several of us in a platoon formation, and he basically told us like, "Hey, if you think you're special, you're not. You're no different than anybody else. You're not the only person that went through all these experiences, so suck it up." So yeah, there it is. If you did start thinking you maybe had PTSD for any reason, I mean, there was, you know, for the mentality that was being preached around at the time when I was in the Marine Corps, and probably not just my time in the Marines either. PTSD would kind of be shown that you were weak-minded, and there was like this sense of shame if you even like brought it up. So it was avoided essentially much of the time. And perfect example, I had one of the sergeants that was in my platoon. I remember we were getting ready to start gearing up for our second deployment, and he had been gone for several days. And when he came back to the platoon, and he said that he had been diagnosed with PTSD, and so they weren't going to let him deploy with us on our next deployment. So if you had PTSD, they would categorize you as non-deployable, and that was definitely something that, as a Marine, that was, almost like dishonoring, you know. So yeah, something you avoided like at any and all costs.
Yeah. And yes, I think you're unfortunately right that it probably is not just your time in the Marines and not just the Marines where that was some of the rhetoric going on about PTSD. So I'm curious to hear as you were injured and as you were transitioning out, either like as DoD was preparing you for transition, did that change at all? Was there any discussion about, or sharing of resources or information that, hey, maybe the military and this injury affected you in some way, and this might be what it can look like and what you can do about it?
No.
No, short answer, no.
Definitely. So they would talk about all kinds of other things. They would put you through resume prepping, resume building, other classes essentially. But at no time was your mental health ever brought up.
So we talked a little bit, and it then kind of your next part of your journey was seeking care at the VA for your physical injury.
Mm-hmm.
So what about in that experience? Were they talking to you at all about mental health and PTSD?
So when after I got out and I was going to my, physical therapy appointments, they would every single appointment when I would go in, check in at the desk, before I would sit down to wait to be called back, they would hand me a couple of papers. And every single time they would do this, they would hand me some papers and say, here, fill these out really quick, hand them back to us. And they were PTSD screenings. So I really didn't know why they were having me take these little surveys and screenings. So I essentially didn't really read them, just kind of filled them out, face value, and handed them back.
Yeah.
There was no like discussion, no, for sure not from the person at the front desk about like, here's what these are and here's why we're giving them to you.
And then based on how you were filling them out, there wasn't really discussion of them
No.
initially, at least
No.
in the doctor's appointments. So okay, so that was kind of the rhetoric and the mood, the general thoughts that everyone had about PTSD that you were kind of in the environment of. So what did, like, you personally, what did you think about PTSD before knowing you had?
I thought I knew what it was, but I really didn't. Essentially, I guess what I thought I knew what it was is what you see on TV, what Hollywood makes PTSD out to be, with these, visual flashbacks and, you hear a car backfire and it triggers you, you hit the deck, start screaming, it's like
very dramatic.
Yes. And so of course I told myself I absolutely don't have that.
Yeah, done. Yeah. Out of my mind. Don't have to worry about it.
Exactly. I also felt like my feelings around PTSD was because of the military and the mindset that was just drilled into about PTSD. That was only something that the weak-minded get.
Yeah.
And because that's something that they directly would tell you, like verbatim.
Yeah. And that wasn't you.
Absolutely not.
Because who would want to believe themselves to be a weak-minded individual? So, okay, so that's all the rhetoric you were getting, the beliefs you had about it couldn't possibly be me. It doesn't look like it's like it looks on TV or the movies, and I'm a strong, capable Marine who could never possibly have that happen.
Never.
Never. Yeah. So what changed? What made you think that actually, you know what? Maybe this is something I'm dealing with.
So over time, I wouldn't say like a long period of time, but just over time, over several more physical therapy appointments, of course they would give me these screenings, these paper surveys to fill out at the beginning of every single appointment. And just over several appointments, I actually started reading the questions. It's like I would read them before, but it was more just like I was reading them without understanding what they were asking because I didn't take the time to really interpret the questions. I was like reading them because there were words on a page. That was it.
Get it done.
And so I actually started reading the questions and started taking a second to actually understand what he was asking me. And I noticed that initially when I was filling out these forms, everything would always be the never column.
Mhm.
And then over time, I started answering one more question or one more response to the right, the sometimes.
Mhm.
And then it would go into often. And then I noticed my answers start going into the far right column of like, yes, I am experiencing these things. I am feeling these things.
Yeah, all the time.
Versus previously, I would answer him how I thought like any normal person would answer these, these questions. So yeah, I started seeing these drastic changes in my responses, and it felt weird. It honestly it was just a weird feeling, seeing that I would answer, circle the answer on the far right, saying yes, I am experiencing these things. And there were a couple of times I would like scratch it out and be like, oh no, I didn't mean to answer it that way. Let me scratch that out and circle a different one, because I often felt like it was going to come off like I was seeking attention, or unwarranted disability.
Yeah, like just try to get the right aid or something.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you feel about when you started noticing, okay, this is real and I'm over here on the far right? How did you feel about that beyond weird?
Honestly, it felt embarrassing, I think that's why sometimes I would scratch it out and answer a different way, because like I felt embarrassed and ashamed to, be answering the questions, confirming that, I was experiencing, PTSD symptoms, and honestly, also believe like whoever read these forms would judge me.
Yeah. So then when you saw, when you kind of changed how you were answering them, did that change at all how the doctor was engaging with you in those appointments?
Yeah, they started asking, like they would repeat some of the questions like in person verbally in the exam room, and so they would kind of go over the answers with me and dive a little deeper, maybe asking some more clarifying questions, and then they started to ask if I wanted to seek counseling services. And for a while I would say no, because of that embarrassment and shameful feelings. But then, after a couple of times them asking me, I could tell they were just being persistent about it, not pushy. They weren't pushy, but they were persistent about it. And so I started thinking that, maybe I should seek counseling.
And do you feel like there's something that kind of put you, I don't want to say pushed you over the edge, that sounds dramatic, but like really helped you make that decision of like, you know what, yeah, I think this would be the best thing for me to do and get some professional counseling?
Yes. So for a long time, I would say, a solid year, after I'd gotten out, I'd been ignoring my reactions to things. And then I started just being more intentional and started becoming more self-aware about those reactions, and realizing that I really didn't like how I was feeling, and I felt that way all the time. So really it was that self-awareness that really kind of started pushing me towards thinking, hey, yeah, I should talk to somebody, but I wanted to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
There were several incidents, just for example, several incidents where I was getting into heated arguments with complete strangers, in public settings too. And ultimately, I'd say one major triggering event was there was a road rage incident, where I had actually put someone's life in danger that was in the car with me. It was someone I cared about. And that was really kind of that epiphany for me that, I needed to seek help.
Yeah, this is serious.
Yeah.
So, okay, you feel like you needed to get help. So kind of what was that process like for you, kind of, I guess, in a nutshell, of like seeking help and then ultimately arriving at the PTSD diagnosis and getting service connected for that?
So when I first started counseling, I was still out in California. After I got out, I stayed there for a couple of years. Found a vet center, and my counselor was actually also a Marine veteran. And we developed, a really great rapport, like right off the bat, essentially.
Nice.
He was easy to talk to. Not just because, he's a Marine vet. I think that did help for me personally. But the fact that, there was zero judgment from the moment I met him. I just felt, I had those feelings of, calm and acceptance that, hey, it's okay. You can tell me whatever you feel like you want to tell me. And there was that feeling of, it's like, hey, you're not going to be judged here in this place, and definitely not by me.
Love to hear about a good counselor.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience, and I, till the end of my days, I will have nothing but good things to say about this guy. So after, seeing him, several times and talking to him, he let me know that I met the criteria for a PTSD diagnosis, which under one lens, it was like, oh, I feel I'm not crazy.
Validated, yeah.
Yes, I felt extremely validated. And then under another lens, it was also almost unnerving to also have that validated. So there was some conflicting feelings going on with that. But the fact that I could pursue getting service connected, that was reassuring.
Yeah.
In a way. But also because of the stigma associated with PTSD at that time, I still didn't feel like I warranted an actual disability rating. I still thought that it was only reserved for those with physical disabilities.
A quote unquote real injury.
A real
may
injury.
You say?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely.
Not alone in that, I don't think.
Prior to the diagnosis, though, and prior before actually going through that process, administratively, essentially through that whole long paperwork process, just having seen counselors, they just off of I guess their reports, essentially they actually ended up putting me on medications, because it was I spoke to a psychologist and a psychiatrist. They put me on medication, several medications actually, to address what was my PTSD, and to kind of be the icing on the cake, was the getting on medications, or having them put me on medications, was what made me think this was definitely something that was serious, and maybe it did warrant being service connected.
I don't think you're alone. That's part of like the biggest stigma we see, right? Is like this belief that there is this serious like difference between physical injuries and mental injuries, and that one is put up on a much more like, oh no, that's legitimate and this isn't, pedestal. And so that's interesting to me to hear that, like, oh, medication made me think it was legit, that kind of makes it more medical in a sense. Is that kind of what, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is that kind of how you felt?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely kind of shifted it into a different gear and put it in under a different light, because it's like, oh, I'm not just talking to a counselor now or a psychologist. Oh, now they're sending me to a medical professional here that's going to give me medication, because they're saying, hey, you could use this. This is going to help you. So yeah, it's definitely a factor.
And so for an important message out there to all, you don't have to be on medication for it to be at this level, right? To be, it is, they're not the same, obviously, a physical injury and a mental injury are not the same, but they are equally as important to get care for, whatever that care looks like to you, and be recognized for what they are
Absolutely.
and the support they require. So you got the diagnosis, which, you know, people have a lot of feelings about that before and after they get it. So I'm curious, how did you feel once you had a formal PTSD diagnosis?
So, you know, like we said a few minutes ago, you know, it's like it was validating, but now having that like officially on paper in, you know, my VA medical records, it was embarrassing. It really was. For me anyway. I immediately felt, you know, this blanket of embarrassment. I didn't want people to know, you know, and so I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell anybody.
Not even other vets?
No. I would listen to their stories, and I would like share stories, you know, war stories, you know, but I never like would come out and verbally say, you know, anything even remotely close to, yes, I have PTSD, or I've been diagnosed PTSD. You know, and I found my shame increased, you know, surrounding the topic.
Having that weight of the diagnosis. Well, for a lighter tangent onto this conversation, for those of you who don't know me and Cody's meeting story, he told me he had PTSD the day I met him. So he had evolved quite a bit at that point, where I was just such a calming presence. You felt I was. But I just remember like, oh, okay, wow, okay, you have PTSD, got it, understood. Don't really know what that means quite yet, but I know it about you. At least we got that.
Yeah, word vomited. What do you
want? Okay, so what does PTSD look like? If you're listening to this, you may know it intimately, more intimately than you wish you did. But for those who maybe not be as familiar, so PTSD does have 4 different symptom categories, right? And those are intrusive memories, which might look like, you know, the flashbacks that you were talking about, the nightmares, things like that. Avoidance, so avoiding, that could be avoiding feelings, avoiding different triggers, situations, things like that. Hyper arousal, which sometimes people refer to as hypervigilance. So again, we'll be honest, a lot of the stuff that you see in the movies, like, you know, checking the locks or looking for IEDs or I can't have my back to an open door, or, you know, needs to be against the wall, or any of those things. And numbing. So that could again be numbing emotions, or that could be using numbing coping strategies. We'll talk about some of those. But I feel it's very important to remind everybody that PTSD, just like any other mental health condition, is not a one size fits all. Not everyone experiences it the same way. So when you see certain things, or even you hear Cody's story and he's telling you about his experience and how this looks for him, don't go out there and assume that if you learn somebody else has PTSD, that's what's happening to them. Because just like we are very individual human beings and experience things differently, the same is true even if we have a mental health diagnosis. So with that said, with that little disclaimer, I'm curious to know kind of how you have seen those symptoms show up in your life and impact your life.
Initially, when I first got out of the Marines, you know, that started kind of displaying itself in ways that started affecting my marriage. At the time, it started deteriorating for sure, to say the least.
Not me, y'all. Not me.
Not Hannah. I made a mistake. Okay. So yeah, so my marriage at the time was deteriorating, and I started drinking. I started isolating myself, you know, and would draw into like my own little bubble. And you know, everything was either an extreme high or an extreme low. There was rarely anything in between. It, I guess, started with the numbing and avoidance, I guess, type behavior. A lot of times I didn't feel like I was actually having any feelings other than probably, anger and rage. Those were the ones that would very easily come to the surface and uh, let themselves out. I didn't communicate with the people in my life at all, if at all. As far as the anger goes, oftentimes, I didn't even know why I was angry. I was just angry, but it was the only emotion that I felt I could display. If any other emotion started to try to surface, it just honestly felt uncomfortable. So I would push it down, and just be emotionless, or I would just completely disconnect and just go into that little bubble. It started showing up in other areas of my life. Of course, the relationships began deteriorating. More arguments with my partner at the time. Usually because I wasn't being responsive enough. So it's like when I was in that middle ground, I wasn't displaying like anger, or I wasn't completely shut off. I was in that emotionless phase in between, almost like a zombie. It's like I wasn't responding enough. I wasn't interacting enough, to, a simple conversation, sitting on the couch, they're just trying to have a conversation with me and I'm just dead face.
Yeah.
Usually probably not even paying attention. So I can see how that would be, could cause an argument.
Yeah.
Or two. But yeah, I would isolate from her and others in my life, friends, family for sure. I didn't want to talk to family at all. I was like, nah, I'm good. And that would last for months. So, of course, I began to drink, as a numbing, coping mechanism. And honestly, it was really more of a distraction than anything. So it was an easy thing to turn to in the beginning. The hyperarousal and hypervigilance, I'd say that was definitely there from right after my first deployment. When I first came home, it's like there are things that were just routine, essentially. Like I like to say, it's like the getting up in the middle of the night, 10 times in the middle of the night, and you walk the house, make sure all the doors are locked, all the blinds are are closed. Windows are shut and locked, just make sure everything's secure. And then I would even lock my bedroom door when I would go back to bed, and that's not a typical thing that most people
I know
do.
you keep saying, and I'm like, no, I don't know.
you know,
but,
right?
But other people listening do know. Yeah.
But ultimately it's like, I felt unsafe, even in my own home because I was used to feeling unsafe. It's like this habitual feeling, atmosphere that you're accustomed to being in. So, I would also, isolate myself because, I would feel unsafe. Not go out, not go hang with friends. I'd always make an excuse, oh, hey, I've got this. Oh, I got that. So yeah, the isolation was definitely a factor there. And intrusive memories, those would creep in and pop up anytime. Like, they didn't care where you were, who you were with, what time of day it was. They would pop up like a little Jack in the Box, like, hey, guess what? Yo, hey, you remember this? You remember this? Hey,
I want to.
what about it? And yeah, so any time of day. They were always worse when I was alone. So when you're alone, you're stuck with your own thoughts, and your own memories.
And what did you just say you were doing a lot of?
Drinking.
No, isolating.
Oh, isolating.
You're spending a lot of time
So
alone.
here you go. So I was just perpetuating, those intrusive thoughts and memories by, isolating myself. Just really asking for those intrusive memories to rear their ugly faces. So yeah, make you drink even more. Definitely had a lot of the vivid nightmares. So a lot of those I can still remember today. You know, I mean, we're talking 14 years later. You know, I'm still remember, actually, since my second deployment, even longer than that. But yeah, very, very vivid dreams, very graphic, and I remember a lot of details of these dreams. You know, even now. And strangely, I remember dying in most of those dreams too. So, so of course, you know, this led to more drinking. You know, both alone and when I'd go out. Of course, you know, going out would just perpetuate the avoidance. You know, the avoiding techniques, I guess. But that would also help me avoid isolation.
Yeah, kind of, but not in the healthiest way.
Not in the healthiest way. So of course, that on top of already getting poor sleep would just add to more poor sleep, and thus the cycle continues.
And thus the cycle continues. Yes. So some of this probably sounds familiar to people listening, but again, that's Cody's experience. So, you know, if you have PTSD or you are the loved one of someone with PTSD, again, I'm just gonna say it looks real different depending on who you are. There are, of course, these commonalities, those symptom categories exist, you know, across most individuals, but what that actually looks like in life can be very different. So you talked a little bit about how you saw this impacting some of your relationships. And so what do you feel was the biggest factor, biggest thing that kind of felt like it was problematic for relationships, whether that be with a partner or others in your life?
I would say for me, a lot of my PTSD manifests in impulsive reactions to emotions, which obviously impacts relationships with people, as well as, you know, interactions with regular people, anybody, you know, civilian strangers. I have, you know, since grown my self-awareness of when that's happening. And so when I do recognize that and am able to hit that pause button, you know, in the moment, that's a win. It's a huge win every single time, even today. You know, it's like that's a huge win, and that feeling of victory. It's like I can ride that wave for days. You know, a lot of times it'll start as frustration, which is a normal feeling everybody gets probably at least 100 times a day, frustrated about something, anything. And it can be, you know, a little bit of frustration, or it can be a lot of frustration. You know, listen, you stub your toe. Oh my God, how frustrating is that, right? Somebody cuts you off in traffic. How frustrating is that? So, it usually start off with getting frustrated about something, but then I feel myself getting worked up, and the natural impulse is to have a disproportionate emotional reaction.
Can you tell us what that might give us an example what that might look like, and then kind of how you have learned to kind of put that pause, like you said, in the process and choose a different path?
Yes, absolutely. I'll use what I feel would be an easy example, possibly a relatable example, road rage. For, you know, and that's a stranger on the road, right?
Yeah.
So for a PTSD reaction, or, you know, an impulsive, emotional, disproportionate reaction, I'd say, you know, somebody cuts you off in traffic, you know, they don't signal, they don't wave, none of that, and, you know, you have to brake check the person behind you because of somebody just cutting you off. So that would probably look like, you know, oh, now I'm going to gas it a little bit, get on their ass, you know, whip around them, get up next to them, you know, stare at them, you know, mean mug them through the friggin' window, and then get in front of them and then cut them off. Okay, now you've created a dangerous situation, very unsafe situation. And now your feelings are elevated. Now you're hyped up. Now you're worked up. Now you're in the mode.
So God forbid they react to your aggression, and you're all hyped up. Who knows where that could go?
Absolutely.
But now, when that happens,
so now when that happens, there's, you know, like I said, and it's taken a lot of work to get here. All right, I will be the first to tell you that it has taken a lot of effort, a lot of growth, a lot of, intentional work to be able to recognize when this frustration is starting to migrate into more than frustration, and to be able to hit that pause button, right? And now I'm not reacting emotionally. Now I'm intentionally reacting logically. And I'm able to essentially write that person off like immediately.
Like not worth my elevated emotion.
Not worth the energy, not worth this person first thing in the morning on my way to work, changing
course of my day, my mood. Yeah.
The entire course, the entire outcome of my mood, which was going to affect my entire day.
Yeah. And everybody around me, most likely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And as you heard him mention the mean mugging, I'm sure a lot of spouses can identify with that. That's still a work in progress, people, as we all are.
Yes.
So what about, how does that maybe look or feel different for you when that was a stranger on the road, right? Nobody. How does that look or feel different for you when it's either a partner relationship like me, or someone you care about, or have that next level relationship with a colleague, a friend, family member, partner?
So for me, I know I say that a lot because, like you said, this can be different for everybody. But for me, what I've noticed is that it's different for those personal relationships. It's become easier for me to be more intentional about hitting that pause button, and taking that time to think about what I want to say or how I want to react before I react.
Yeah.
I want to respond to things in a more, emotionally intelligent way versus just an impulsively emotional way.
Yep.
I don't want to react with the loudest emotion that's on the surface, and be able to really figure out how I really feel about a situation before responding.
Because we all know who the loudest emotion is for all of us. Let's be real. It's never the good ones. All right. So, and when we think about relationships too, like, this is something that, PTSD impacts your life, and this is something you have to manage, and people in your life can have a positive or a negative impact on that. So I'm curious, what have you seen to be some of those positive and negative influences of people in your life when it comes to you having PTSD?
Sure. So I'll start with the negatives. But I'd say, so at the time, I don't have these friends anymore because of growth.
Yeah. Okay.
But friends that just wanted to go out drinking all the time. Hey, let's go out, let's go get a beer, let's go drink, let's go party, let's go hang out, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, and then, hey, why not Monday night, right? But so that perpetuated the unhealthy coping of drinking, right? Which then would just, snowball into all the other things that were not helpful. Excuse me. And in the more intimate relationships, there were people who were unsupportive of, what I was trying to navigate. They were flat out just like didn't care. They would tell me verbatim they didn't care.
Amazing.
So then, of course, the reaction to that would be like, well, all right, well, then I'm going to go out drinking.
Yeah. Or then I don't care about you that much.
Right.
Or you don't care about me that much, probably.
Because like we talked about before, it's like, out drinking, like Fun Cody would come out,
Cody,
that guy. And, but, Fun Cody, he was a great.
Fun Cody doesn't have PTSD.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But then, of course, that would just perpetuate the cycle.
Right. Because Fun Cody is not Cody. He's a piece of Cody.
Yes.
But not your whole self.
Exactly.
All right. Well, what about the positives?
Oh, positives. Okay. My list of positives is far greater, actually. So, my buddy, his name's Degler. He, a Marine buddy that I essentially what we call, I grew up in the Marine Corps with him. We met early on. We met in boot camp. We went to the same Marine combat training together. Went to the same schools together, ended up in the same unit together. So, and we went on our first deployment together. This guy, he's, probably one of my best friends in the world. And even now, he lives several states away, but we still talk, we still text, we still check in on each other. And, we talk to each other about anything and everything. And there's no judgment, there's no shame, it's just, we're often being jokingly about a lot of things, but then when one of us is struggling with something, the other one is truly there to listen.
Peer support.
Peer support. I'm telling you, it's like
formal or informal, man. It's huge.
It is huge. I've had great counselors who have made a genuine difference in my life. I can think of 3 specifically that I've had. And I've gone through several counselors, but that's, for a lot of different reasons. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but, I found these 3 over my experience in the last 15 years, essentially, that have really, made a huge difference in my life.
And, I will ask you to say, or say for you, you decide. I think a good message is that, it does take some trial and error. You're not necessarily going to find the perfect fit if you're looking for counseling on the first try.
Yes.
But you found 3, and maybe some people are like, that sounds small over 15 years, but it's really not. 3 that you could say were really impactful. And if you had stopped looking, say the first one was not, and you stopped looking, you would have never found the other ones.
And and so some counselors, you go in, you have a session with them, and you realize, hey, this wasn't the vibe I'm looking for, or and from what I found too, when you just be very honest with the counselor, and they've never like lashed back at me, or there was no negative feedback about it from the counselor. They were just
they're there for you. Hey, and if they're not, then they are the wrong fit.
They'd say, I understand. They would be understanding about that, and they would say, hey, my job is to get you to somebody that you do feel comfortable with, and so that
you have
journey,
to advocate for yourself.
Absolutely, advocate for yourself. Don't be shy about it. Don't just be there like, oh, they're a counselor, and even if you don't feel like you're completely comfortable, and it may have nothing, not like you may not be able to pinpoint any specific thing other than, you're
not working.
Yeah, it's just not working for whatever reason. It doesn't matter the reason, and they'll refer you to the next person.
Mm-hmm. So keep trying.
Keep trying. And this is in no particular order, I want you to know. Okay.
Otherwise, I would have been number 1.
Positive influences in my life. Now, if we're going in a timeline order, yes, here. So, my amazing and beautiful wife, Hannah.
Oh, what?
Has, surprising, right? Has been a huge positive influence on my mental health. In a variety of ways. I mean, I could sit here for an hour and talk to you about it. We don't have time for that.
No, we don't.
But just to say that, you definitely put things in a lot of, when we were first dating, essentially, you would say things to me that would put things in a very specific light, ways I'd never thought about certain things, and just essentially just like how you treated me, that zero judgment, that, hey, you would say you'd be a tree sometimes and just listen. And that's something, and just, you're just supportive, just all around. And that was something that I had very little experience with. And so that really resonated with me from, well, day 1, I told you I had PTSD. Apparently it was from day 1.
Yeah, apparently you felt somewhat safe to tell me that. Wow.
And, some of the best friends I've ever had were dogs. And not just any dogs, like these guys were my best friends. I had, one dog that we used to have. I actually found him as a puppy before Hannah and I met. Found him as a little, like, roughly 10-week-old puppy. His name was Trooper. Rest in peace, buddy. He was my best friend in the world. He saw me through everything after the Marine Corps. He'll always be, imprinted on my heart for sure.
I miss you, bud.
the unconditional love and support that, they offer, there's no comparison.
Yeah.
And
last but certainly not least,
our daughter, Reese, she has definitely changed me in ways I never even, considered. Essentially, people always say, "Oh, when you have kids, you change." I'm
Sure,
like,
yeah, obviously,
okay,
yeah.
whatever. Yeah, you're a parent now. Okay, yeah, I get it, but I didn't get it, and now I do get it. And even more so, you know, those day-to-day struggles when it comes to PTSD, it just really puts things, in a different light to where, I want to be that better person every single day and set that good example for her, that healthy example. And so, just, having Reese has really, shifted things into a completely different gear for me when it comes to my PTSD. And, anytime I even remotely start feeling reactive to, any kind of situation.
Pause.
Mhm. That pause button gets like almost automatically activated.
Yeah. Which, like, from the outside looking in, like, I was, we're all worried about how we're going to be as parents, and I won't lie, I was concerned what will PTSD look like with a kid around, like how is that, going to impact things. I spent a lot of time thinking about it before we got pregnant, when we were pregnant. And I have totally just exactly what you described was like obvious to me almost from day one, of just like this whole mental shift about, who you wanted to be for her, and how you, wanted to model and, be able to regulate your emotions, and, things that, let's just be honest, we all need to be super aware of when we're parenting. But it's been really cool to see that shift happen.
Are you calling me cool?
Cool. We're cool parents, y'all.
Believe it.
But yeah, so shout out to our daughter. She's the best.
Reese.
So, we're a couple talking about PTSD and how we manage this in our relationship. So you've heard some, but not much. And so I was going to share a little bit from my perspective of, how my journey and understanding your PTSD, and also like how my behaviors and reactions to things like played on PTSD. We talk a lot about the walking on eggshells that loved ones feel they are doing to like not trigger someone with PTSD. That is a very real feeling, and to some, I'll be honest, I would say to some degree, like doesn't fully go away. There will be things, even I'll think about it, I'm like, oh, is this gonna, are we, I'll be really looking at you, like eyeballing you, like, is he good? That person just cut us off, like, or, whatever it might be, like, oh, it's a stressful, something stressful is going on in our lives. And, so I can't turn that off fully. But, figuring that out was such a wild ride. And I'll be the first to admit it was not a pleasant ride. I don't like roller coasters. It was a roller coaster, and I don't like them. So it was a roller coaster for me. Trying to figure out why you were talking about those kind of impulsive reactions you had to, or emotional reactions you had. And I would be sitting there like, what's going on? Like, this was a very normal thing. And I kept trying to put myself in your shoes. And that was probably the first problem, was I thought I could, and I thought I really could. Like, I could be like, this is how I would react to this situation. He's blowing this way out of proportion. He just needs to understand how not a big deal this is. And I would try and rationalize with you. I would try to, if I felt like you weren't understanding where I was coming from, that was, my own baggage of, I still kind of do, but have had a lot of issues of like feeling like I wasn't being understood. And so I would like butt heads with you. And if you've heard me talk before, you've probably heard me talk about a video I love where this spouse talks about her understanding of her husband's PTSD, and she describes him as three guys, right? He's the man she married, the man she loves, he's his military culture, all those behaviors, yada yada yada. And he's Rambo, and Rambo is his PTSD. And I remember the moment I watched that video for the first time, it was like the skies opened up. I was like, this is exactly what it feels like. And since then, I've, talked to honestly probably hundreds of spouses at this point who are like, yes, 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 that is what it feels like. And they have their own nicknames. So for her, it was Rambo. I've heard Venom. I've heard the Bear, the Beast. I've heard, which one is it? Hyde, Jekyll. I don't Hyde. I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah,
Mr. Hyde. There we go, Mr. Hyde. I've heard the Hulk, which I know you like. And for me, I just for whatever reason decided to call it your guy. Your guy is out. Your guy is showing. When you're kind of having this emotional, not that guy. When you're having that heightened emotional reaction, right? And it's been really helpful for me to think about it that way. And to talk to you about it that way, because what I learned quickly is that guy doesn't care about the same things that Cody, my husband, cares about. I don't really have a relationship with that guy. Not anything healthy. That guy is seeing red, and he has one agenda, which is to be the loudest emotion in the room.
Hulk smash.
Hulk smash. Can't reason with that guy. And Lord, did I try? I tried, and I didn't understand for the longest time. And I also took it real personally. Everything that guy did, I took really personally and I really blamed myself. I thought I did something to hurt you, to upset you, and I really couldn't understand what it was. And it really made me feel quite bad about myself, trying to figure out what I was doing wrong. And it was when I saw that video that I realized, oh, I'm not doing anything wrong. This isn't about me. Maybe something I said triggered something, or something happened triggered something, but this reaction is not about me. It's not even really at me. I'm there, I'm physically receiving it. But this is someone else talking to someone else. Something else talking to someone else. And that I can speak from at least the spouse perspective was huge, because then I could learn how to identify when that guy was talking to me and change my response and change how I felt about it. Let's pretend that's not an easy thing to do. It doesn't happen overnight. Doesn't mean it doesn't sometimes make me feel bad, but more often than not, I can quickly identify it and say, you know what? He needs to have his moment in the sun. I can be here for that and be supportive and just be a tree and listen to him. Or if I can't handle that right now, I can remove myself from the situation, because he's going to calm down in a little bit. He just needs to have his moment. But that's been my experience, but I just talked for a really long time. So I'm curious, what's been helpful to you? Do you find that helpful to think about it in that way?
Actually, yeah. And, one thing that's really helped, with my own self-awareness is, you bringing all that information to me, from the very first time that, you approached me with your feelings and how it affects you. And, like I said, it's just increased that self-awareness when it comes to, those heightened emotional responses and, the Hulk wanting to come out. I definitely say it's, it happens, less frequent.
Oh, yes.
Um,
Like barely at all.
Yeah, and so that's taken, just like, I said it earlier, a lot
Hard
of
work,
effort, a lot of
yeah.
hard work. Just being intentional. Um, but I'd say, for me, things that have, really have to is, just that communicating. Like I say, you've communicated with me. It's helped me, consider your aspect of things, and then how that affects, others around me, and being able to have a conversation about it,
And vice versa, have you communicate with me, how you're feeling, what you're experiencing, communication, y'all. Couples need to do it, period, no matter what you're dealing with. But like, we talk about this stuff a lot, and like, well, that makes it sound like we're constantly talking about it, but like, and now I feel like it's gotten to a point that one technique that's very important that I've learned is having these conversations with my husband, Cody,
yes,
not with that guy. Because that guy he's not the full you, so he's not gonna
right,
he's not that emotionally intelligent, self-aware version of you. And so striking when the iron is cool and being intentional, because I think sometimes what used to happen, which I hear a lot of other spouses say, is like they try to have the conversation in the moment, it doesn't work. It's not going to work. Like, let me just tell you that it's not going to work. But then it's never revisited,
right.
Then things are good, and so you don't want to rock the boat by bringing up the conversation. So you never bring up the conversation, and it happens again and again and again. And meanwhile, you're building resentment about it.
Right.
So talk.
Yeah. For me, it's like in being able to have those conversations when, the logical, guy has the reins, it's a moment of putting your own, your pride aside. It's like you have to, just really be humble about this. And it's humbling to have the conversation, and sometimes it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it's like pushing past that. It's like, hey, this isn't just about you, and yes, this is feeling uncomfortable, and I would feel ashamed initially, because I didn't like that guy at all. But pushing past that, and being able to have that open conversation, I found it more liberating than anything else. It really helped me almost like completely disconnect from that guy. It's like, hey, you're not this demonic, shadow on my shoulder that is ready to take the reins at any given time. You're not like this curse.
Yeah.
And so it was really, freeing, essentially, to have those conversations. And it helped me, that self-awareness would jump up several notches, anytime we would have a conversation.
Yeah. And, I think being able to, like you said, those were not easy for either of us in the beginning. And they're not always easy now, depending on what we're talking about. But I would say we, as individuals, grew so much from being able to, push past those discomforts and talking about it, or the fears of talking about it. And then, of course, obviously, as a couple, grew so much as a result. Like, now I really do feel like we can talk about anything. Like, if I even have that moment of like, oh, how is he going to react to this? I'm like, yeah, but what's going to happen if you don't? Like, you're just going to feel like shit about it? Like, no, talk about it. And also being able to hear from his perspective, like, hearing how you felt about your PTSD and how you felt in those moments. Also, being able to hear that gave me I'm a very empathetic person, obviously. I'm in the social work field. It's easy for me to be empathetic, but when you're in a relationship, sometimes it's harder than you think, because you feel hurt by the thing. And so it's harder to have empathy when you feel hurt by the person. And so being able to understand how he felt, I was really able to become more empathetic. And in those moments where that guy might start to come out, I have that instead of being like, Cody, gosh, like, why? I thought why are you letting this happen? I would say that. I really believed that early on. Why are you choosing to let this happen? Now I know that's not the case, right? This is not anything you want to be dealing with at all. And how insert emotion, how difficult, challenging, painful, scary must it be for you to not feel in control in those moments. And so being able to think of it in that way and hear from him really allowed me to have that empathy, where when my mind kind of wants to go like, oh, why are you choosing to behave this way, reminding myself that you're not. And then, for all those people listening, like, okay, yeah, but it's not getting any better. It's about what they do after the fact, right? Are they making changes? Or do they want to make changes, and are they taking steps to get healthier? To work on this for themselves and with you and for your family. Because that's all they can do. And so remembering that has been so helpful for me to be more empathetic in those moments, and not take it personally, and not get upset at Cody, my husband, right?
Yeah, and sometimes it feels like, the day to day, you're not making any progress, but it's those little slivers of effort on that day to day that end up being huge chunks of improvement.
Yeah. And so as we wrap up, I think it's helpful to hear what are some of those things day to day that you put into practice that you feel like really help you kind of manage that.
Honestly, I first learned about, I'm gonna throw the term out there, self-care. Okay. I know people throw it around, willy-nilly these days. Is that even something people say anymore? Jesus.
You just said
so it. Apparently, people just kind of nonchalantly throw it out there, but I first learned about self-care from you. I'm like, oh, self-care, like, if I could break it down, I think I know what that means, but I cannot stress self-care enough. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, how are you expected to take care of anybody else, or be there for anybody else?
Yeah.
So that self-care that I've adopted into my life, and it's not every day, obviously, life is there, you have your career, your job, other, demands from others around you. If you have your parents, obviously your needs always go on the back burner, but like
don't let it happen.
Don't let it happen. But in the moment, it's like sometimes my self-care is time with my daughter.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm getting choked up thinking about her, and I haven't seen her in 2 days. That self-care, sometimes for me, it takes different forms. It doesn't have to be just one thing. Because sometimes that one thing, isn't available. So you have to take other little wins with self-care here and there wherever you can. Sometimes it can be, sure, 5 minutes. Sometimes it could be 30 minutes. Sometimes it can be a couple hours. It just depends. Situation dictates. But take those little self-care moments when you can, and
wherever you can.
Wherever you can. So for me, it's working out sometimes, playing disc golf. A buddy of mine got me into disc golf, and I'm like, oh, hey, this is a cheap hobby. Don't believe it.
No, it's not.
And playing disc golf, with friends or even by myself. I actually really enjoy playing disc golf by myself sometimes. And surprisingly enough, this is gonna be a weird one, but mowing the yard actually it's for me, it's therapeutic sometimes.
I'm a lucky lady.
Even though when you look at the yard, sometimes you're like, no, oh no, I gotta mow the yard. And you're like, wait a minute, this isn't a bad thing.
I'll make it self-care.
Right, exactly. But yeah, I didn't really realize how important it was until I kept hearing you talk about it because of your work. That really helped me adopt it into my life. So don't disregard how effective it can be. Make time for it even when it's hard, and even if it's just, like I said, those small acts, those small brief moments, a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, take them. They can make a difference. And self-reflection has probably been the biggest that today has helped me manage my PTSD. I self-reflect, probably every single day. And I know I said it on the last podcast just because it resonates with me. So I'm hoping it resonates with, others, and it can help others, is, just try to be that little bit better, every day. And it can be the tiniest little thing. But remember, it's that effort that counts, so that self-reflection at the end of every day for me, not being, not critical, thank you, not being critical of myself, but reflecting. Extend yourself grace. And you're the first person that ever told me that, and that changed my life.
Yes, extend yourself grace, people.
And just know that, hey, you are trying, you are doing your best, and some days are better than others. All right, some days you are, at your best, and some days you're not, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, I self-reflect and think of, okay, what's one small thing I can do a little bit better. And for me, oftentimes it's, hey, how I react to things.
Yeah. And then, I mean, that was your one piece of wisdom last time, but I think you have some additional wisdom to offer our listeners before we sign off for today.
Yeah, there was something I was going to say earlier, but now I can't remember what that was. So, but one piece of advice, especially when it comes to, since we're on the subject of PTSD, seeking help. It's okay to ask for help. It is okay to ask for help. I have had several friends that, I could say now today that, I wish would have asked for help. It's okay to ask for help. It's intimidating to ask for help. It's hard to ask for help, but it's okay to ask for help. And like others going through this, like myself, it's like, I want you to ask for help, even if it's you come to me, even if it's going to, like I said, that peer support, it's like, you don't immediately have to go to seeking professional help.
Absolutely.
Because that can be intimidating too. And it's okay. That's okay to feel like that. But yeah, it's, ask for help. We want you to ask for help. Please ask us for help.
Well, thank you, Cody, and thank you all for listening. Like I said, we know it's obviously a topic that touches our lives and our family, but I know, unfortunately, that it touches millions of people and families. And so I think it's always good to be talking about it and sharing experiences and, what's worked for people. We hope that you found some of that helpful today, or if you didn't know much about this topic, that maybe you learned something. If you were listening and you have someone in your life who has PTSD, just be mindful of some of these things and be a supportive person to them in their life. That's all we can really do, and we hope you found this supportive. So thank you, my love, for coming on again with us.
Thank you
I
for having me.
appreciate you always.
Of course.
And we'll see you next month.
Thanks again for joining us on the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. We thank you for listening today and hope today's session left you feeling a little more connected or gave you some insight into the experiences of our military and veteran families. Don't forget to check us out at veteranspousenetwork.org to learn more about how our military and veteran families can receive the support they deserve.